first highlight of the evening. So it's time to welcome our guest speaker to the stage, Charles Morris. So let me stop sharing here so I can see you all better. And I will formally introduce Charles, and there's so much I could talk about him, but I'll keep it short so we can actually chat. So Charles is the founder of Newman Studio, where he helps organizations to empower their employees with mindfulness and depth psychology-based practices. Previously, he was an engineering and learning and development leader at Microsoft, where he created Mindful Growth, a mindfulness-based program and community of several thousand employees. Charles holds a master's degree in mindfulness studies from Lesley University and is currently earning his PhD in depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. You can listen to his meditations and find upcoming audio courses by following him on the Inside Timer app, which is very exciting. He lives in Vancouver Island, Canada, and has 2 teenage daughters. Fun fact about Charles is that he can play on the piano entertainer upside down. Although my partner is a piano player as well, I was like, entertainer, what is this? So if you don't know, and I'm a terrible singer, but I'll go, is that the tune is like dun 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 dun, probably the happiest song ever, right? And he can play that upside down, so that's very cool. So welcome, Charles. Thanks so much for making the time, donating your time to be here with us. Yeah, let's start with maybe you sharing a little bit about your journey. How did you become the global L&D director at Microsoft in your previous life?
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. First off, thanks for the invitation, and my pleasure to be here. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we talk about our journey, because I think, maybe some of you looked me up on LinkedIn and you see what I call the outer career journey, right? That's what we put on LinkedIn. It's, this position, this position, this position. And it seems to make sense. Okay, eventually, you get to a certain position. Mine seems to take a bit of a left turn from engineering to HR, which is maybe a bit of a clue that there's more to the story, right? I think, so the first thing I would love for all of you to just think about for your own careers is, okay, you've got your resume, let's call it your outer journey. What has been your corresponding inner journey through that? And I think as you get interested in mindfulness, you start getting more and more interested in, like, okay, I'm getting different jobs, maybe I'm getting promoted, but what's happening inside here? How am I, what is my journey on the inside? And so for me to understand how they're related, we actually have to go back to, I didn't become the global L&D director at Microsoft, a global L&D director at Microsoft, until 2018. But really the pieces started to fall into place, or were starting to be put into place in 2004. And by that point, I was only a few years into my career at Microsoft. And I was actually on the verge of quitting, because I thought I wasn't cut out for Microsoft. It was too stressful, too competitive, too fast-paced. I felt like I wasn't enough. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't driven enough. You go down the list. Maybe some of you have heard of the phenomenon of imposter syndrome. And so I was feeling that. And luckily for me, before I handed in my resignation, I got interested in mindfulness and meditation. And it really caught my interest in a really, really deep way. I got into it. And eventually, actually, initially, I thought that was confirmation that I needed to leave Microsoft. I was like, oh yeah, these are my people, like I want to do more of this. And I was actually found myself in England listening to this Tibetan Lama teach to thousands of people. And somewhere along the way in his talk, he said this one line that changed the course of where I was heading. He said, it doesn't matter what kind of job you have. You can have a construction job, you can have a restaurant job, you can have a computer job. I said, oh, I've got one of those. I've got a computer job. He said, you don't need to change your job. You need to change the mind that you bring to your job. And I was like, you know, the light bulb kind of went on on above my head. And I realized that I was kind of placing all of my problems on things out there. You know, it's like my manager, the people around me, the technology, so forth, the company. And I wasn't fully owning my own part in creating my experience at Microsoft. And so if anything, it just posed a question. I wasn't convinced yet. I was like, okay, well, you know, let me just try this out. Let's see what can change if I start up trying to apply this at my work. And so that really launched me into this, you know, decade plus long experiment where I started to think, okay, well, it's one thing if I can sit on a cushion while it's quiet and all nice in the morning after I've woken up and I'm not too distracted and feel peaceful and centered and good and happy and all of that. And it's a whole other thing if I can do that when there's, you know, a deadline and there's emails coming in, the phone's ringing, people are knocking at my door. And that's the real test of mindfulness. And so I got into this mindset of like, oh, wait a second, I want to see if this really works. And I have kind of like a perfect training ground that I spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week at every week. And so, you know, it wasn't overnight, but I would say also the results, you know, I noticed them. Things started to change. You know, just I don't want to take too much time, but I went from, you know, my initial goal was to survive at the company, and I was like, I found survival, you know, no problem. I started to look forward to going back to work. Not only that, I started to thrive. I started to get promoted, and you know, my manager would say like, wow, we want someone like you who is calm and centered, makes good decisions in stressful situations, in leadership positions. And honestly, it wasn't obviously my goal. It's like, I'm going to meditate so I can do better, so I can get promoted in my career, but it just kind of worked out that way. And this was a time, you know, through 2010, 2015, where it was really kind of like my secret weapon. You know, people would ask me like, what do you do? Like, how do you just stay so zen or whatever in these meetings or in these situations? And, you know, depending on who it was, maybe I would let them know, but, you know, it was still at that time not something I was talking about openly. And it wasn't really until 2016 that I was inspired to share it with others, and that led to mindful growth, which I know we'll talk about in my transition to HR.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Charles. I was having like 100 tangents in my mind with your sharing, and I cannot recommend highly enough people to read the article that Charles published a few years ago here on LinkedIn about mindful growth. It's a quite long and very comprehensive article with lots of good reference to research. Is that okay if I comment on a few things that you mentioned, Charles?
Please. Yeah,
before I ask
wonderful.
the next question. So first point, you mentioned our inner life, you know, inviting people to reflect on their outer life, what looks like in the LinkedIn, and the inner life. I think that's great, because for some of us, you know, that's not very clear. So great invitation. Thanks for mentioning the imposter syndrome, or this feeling of not being, you know, good enough. It's actually, some people say that we have these, all of us, we have these, some of these three universal fears of not being good enough, or not feeling loved, or belonging, that we all experience in some level, some of those fears. And not being good enough could come in very different flavors of not intelligent enough, no smart enough, no beautiful enough, sporty enough, whatever version of that. Love your insights about when you heard to the Rinpoche of the Lama that changing, is not the point, because John Kabat-Zinn said, wherever you go, there you are. So sometimes we think that if we change organization, change the role, things will be sorted, but no, because, wherever we go, we are there. So not necessarily changing would solve the problem. And yes, mindfulness in action, this is really the ultimate goal, right? That's what we want really in the end, to be cool under pressure. In your article, you talk about having this unflappable calm, right? That's how you were described by your colleagues. So great stuff. Thank you. So how about you tell us a little bit about how the Mindful Growth community and program came together at Microsoft, please, Charles.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It really, I think, started with a change in CEO, actually. And I think this is an important part of my story, because as all of you as leaders, I think it really hopefully will inspire you to show what an impact you can make by what you say, your example, and so forth. And so in 2014 or so, there was a big change in the CEO position at Microsoft. Probably a lot of you know about this just through seeing the news, where we went from Steve Ballmer, who was he was a second CEO after Bill Gates, who was a very kind of financially, I'd say, driven leader, came up through the sales ranks and so forth. And then Satya came in. He was actually an ex-engineer. But what struck everyone, myself included, was how much of a focus he put on the people. And I think this is where, the Mindful CIO manifesto, when you look at that, there's a massive people focus. And in particular, Satya started talking about growth mindset. He looked at what was wrong with Microsoft, and this company that had been at the top, and if you remember back to 2013, 2014, it's actually not like it is today, where Microsoft is still very much among the global tech leaders. There was this perception that they were being overtaken by Amazon, Google, Facebook, and so forth, being left behind. And Satya diagnosed all of that down to a culture issue, a people issue. And he brought this concept of growth mindset. Hopefully a lot of you have heard of it. I won't go too much into it. It's based on a book called Mindset by Professor Carol Dweck out of Stanford, I believe. And the essence of growth mindset is this idea that we're always learning, we're always growing as people. And so his idea was to counteract this culture that had kind of set in at Microsoft, where there's a sense that, oh yeah, we know everything, we're at the top. It's a little bit of arrogance. It's an inflexible mindset. It doesn't lend itself to listening. It lends itself to telling people, including customers, the way things are. And you could see the results of that through that more downward phase of Microsoft. And so what happened was I basically looked at that concept. I read the book. I was like, wow, this idea that we are learning and growing and changing is like right at the core of mindfulness. It's the very essence of mindfulness. And not only that, mindfulness gives us tools, practical things that we can do every day to actually guide the way that we are changing and growing every day. And so I saw this beautiful kind of synergy between growth mindset and mindfulness, and that became the impetus for me to create this mindful growth program. And so it really was something that I would say, again, was not something I planned ahead of time. I just got inspired. He is such an authentic leader. And when he started talking about things like empathy and purpose, I could tell he really meant it. And so often people ask me like, hey, and this gets back to, I think, again, the power that all of you have as leaders. Sometimes people ask me like, hey, did you meet with Satya? Did he give you the green light to build this program? And the answer is no. Actually, it's yes and no. He didn't meet with me directly. He didn't have to give me that order, so to speak, because that's kind of the old way, hierarchical way of doing things, all the workers kind of waiting for the orders from above. What he did was he gave me permission through his own example, through what he was saying up on stage, to the point where I was inspired. I wanted to help his broader effort of changing the culture at the company. And so, I just basically did what I could, and I approached my manager about carving off some time to work on this project. I started talking to people in HR and proposed this program through the memo that I actually ended up publishing on LinkedIn. And, things started to fall into place, and I designed a program using some of what I had learned over decades of my own practice and teaching, as well as this master's program that I mentioned that got me up to speed on a lot of the neuroscience and so forth. And then, yeah, over time, just started to scale it and eventually, found my way into HR. And as you said, by the time I left the company in 2021, there were over a couple of thousand people in the community. So it was pretty amazing to watch it grow.
I see. Thanks, Charles, for sharing. And yeah, again, many rabbit holes there. So Microsoft was really looking for cultural change. You saw the opportunity, the potential, mindfulness, your personal practice of mindfulness, growth mindset, and made a proposal, and then actually, you got the support. So you did a bit of job crafting, on the go, created space for yourself there, and received the support that you needed. And at the same time, I imagine, because I had opportunity to meet with Peter Boltzmann from SAP, like random a few years ago when he was here for the Mindful Leadership Forum in Sydney. Peter Boltzmann is I think he still is the Chief Mindfulness Officer for SAP. I remember when I heard that SAP had a mindfulness officer, I couldn't believe, so, and Google also made very significant investment. So I imagine that when you kicked off the program was that phase where Google had a search inside yourself and SAP was starting up. So you had a little bit of a, business case from other tech companies as well. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. Google in particular was very helpful because at that point, Jade Tan had published the book Search Inside Yourself. And as you all know, the tech industry is very, very competitive. And so being able to point at one of our major competitors and say, hey, look, they're getting on this bandwagon, we shouldn't be left behind. I wouldn't say it was the main argument, but it was certainly in my toolbox of ways to talk to executives and other leaders about why this was an important initiative and something to support. Although I will say that a lot of the growth came through, the vast majority of the growth came through grassroots effort, much like this community again, where it wasn't, getting some executives to say, this is what people should be doing. It was really about just catching people's interest and people really gravitating to the program themselves because it was helping them. It was making a difference in their own lives. And so even to this day, it's still going and is for the most part a volunteer-led program.
Cool. I have your article in front of me because I was reading, reviewing, refresh my memory. And would you mind commenting on the format? Because I think for some people maybe a bit abstract, everything is in the article, but for how long it was roughly? You talk about some of the benefits in your business case. You had, stress reduction, focus and clarity, which is so important for decision making, creativity, innovation, clearly very crucial for competitiveness, as an advantage competitiveness for Microsoft, emotional intelligence, empathy and compassion. So would like to comment how the program looked like roughly. I remember there was a combination of reflection, attending sessions.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was as I started to see how mindfulness was being used in the secular realm, it was really important for me to bring as much of what I felt I had gained, again, in ways that, of course, are appropriate and supported by science, But in particular for me, I really did not want mindfulness to be only a stress relief thing. Not to say that stress relief isn't important, but to me, the possibilities, the potential is so much bigger than that. I think a lot of people start there to just kind of be able to calm themselves down, maybe be able to sleep well, be able to transition from work life to home life, for example. Those are all great things. However, you listed some of the other areas I really wanted to get into, things like resilience, creativity, I think is a great one because that's so much about innovation and really, what distinguishes, I think, the great companies and the great employees going forward is actually creativity. And of course, as AI and other technologies are on the rise, like human creativity is really the essence of what we need to bring. But then getting into empathy, compassion, values, and purpose. So as you can tell, it was a very wide-ranging program. And what I wanted to do was provide a broad enough base such that people would basically have a boot camp type experience where by the end, not only would they have a community and practice under their belt, but they'd also have a series of different practices where, in my mind, it's like, what do I need today? And so, of course, a lot of, you want to start simple. Maybe you have gotten into meditation through focusing on the breath or focusing on your senses, your body, and so forth. Again, that's great. But to me, I feel like having a toolbox where maybe if there's a relational issue happening, you're actually able to reach into that and say, okay, I need to really focus on, let's say visualizing this person and seeing what we have in common so that we can build more empathy into our relationship, for example. So, really extending beyond, again, the core, what I call the core set of mindfulness practices into more visualization, more heart-based practices, more creative practices. And so when I brought that all together, it ended up being about 24 hours, 24 to 30 hours of course content. And so it was quite in depth and I did get a lot of feedback on that. People were like, wow, that's a big commitment, especially at the beginning. But for people who committed and made it to the end, they really got it, and I think appreciated the depth that they were able to leave the program with. And then, of course, since then, we kind of spun off some simpler, smaller subsets for people who didn't want to make that commitment. But I wanted to start with something a little bit bigger.
Proper, and then the Mac mindfulness approach for those who
Yeah.
want a quick solution. Thanks so much for sharing. Charles, let's shift gears and talk a little bit more about you. Self-care strategy number one, I think we know the answer, but I'll ask anyway. What would that be?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'll avoid doing the obvious answer, which is like, get on the cushion. I'm going to use this opportunity, and this is a very personal thing, especially in the last 6 months for me, where, a lot of us, the word mind is right there in the title, mindfulness. And when we hear mind, we tend to think kind of like up here, right? It's like mindfulness is good at slowing, calming my thoughts and so forth. But I really want to bring it back to the body. And I know this is something that eventually comes around. If you study mindfulness long enough, you realize actually it's a bit of a misnomer, because a big part of the practice is actually bringing you back into your humanity, actually counteracting a lot of what our jobs, I think all of you as kind of in the tech industry, we spend so much time up here. And actually one of the best ways to counteract that is to learn really deeply to get into our body. I like to take that one step further with challenge people again. That's what I'm about, is because I think often we get there either through health and diet and so forth. However, if we check, we're still treating our body kind of like a machine. It's like, oh, I gotta change the tires. I gotta, I got to put in good fuel and that sort of thing. And again, that's a great first step. But I really want to encourage all of you, if you say, yeah, check, I take care of my body, to go that extra step and start to listen to your body. Pretend like it has a voice and that it's telling you something with how it's feeling. And to start to see the things that start to pop up, not just as, oh, wow, the machine's broken, I need to do something, but actually, more in a dialogical kind of way. Like, what is this trying to tell me below the surface about what I need? What's going on with me? In the same way that we look at, some of the feelings and emotions through other mindfulness-based practices. And so, yeah, it's a great practice because it's actually very creative. You get to look a little bit deeper into our relationships with our bodies. So I'll leave it at that, but hopefully that's intriguing enough for people to start to get curious about.
You definitely got me curious. I think you need to write another article, Charles, about that element there. Thank you. How about mindful leadership? When you hear now that those two words, or that a considered idea, what would you say that comes to your mind, or what mindful leadership means to you?
Yeah, right. We're a community of mindful leaders. I think the first thing I'll say is what it does not necessarily mean. I think it does not necessarily mean that all of you have to start, all of your meetings with meditations, or, kind of put on that hat, so to speak, in your organization. If you choose to do that, like, obviously that's wonderful, but to me that's not at all required to be a mindful leader. I think first and foremost, being a mindful leader means being dedicated to your own practice, having your own practice, and starting to really understand how much of your impact on your organization as a leader is about presence, is about being, is about how you show up. And so all of these phrases I repeated a few times because we're so accustomed to our jobs being about action. And of course, action is important. The words you say, the things you do, the decisions you make are important. However, to me, mindful leadership is primarily about paying attention to, again, your presence, how you show up, realizing that there's so much that's communicated beyond your actions. It's, it's your facial expressions. It goes beyond that. It's really, not to get too woo-woo, I guess, but like, it's the energy that you bring to the room. I mean, I don't think this is a great surprise that when someone walks in a room, when a leader sits down, people feel something, and it's important, actually. And so that's, that comes from, as I was saying earlier, your inner journey, your inner awareness of where you are, what what stimulus you're taking in, how you're responding, all of that stuff. So that's step one. I think for me, step two is then turning the mirror outwards and continuing to look at the people in your organizations, on your teams, the people that you work with, as, see their inner journey, start to see work as a central part of everyone's life, not just something that they're doing for a paycheck, but really seeing them as whole beings who have lives outside of work, who are searching for purpose and meaning. And, to me, the more we can see people as these whole humans, the more we can work effectively with them, the more we can get the best out of them, the more we can ensure that they have, it's a win-win situation. To me, it's like, yeah, if someone is motivated, they love what they're doing, they feel purpose, then of course they're going to do a better job, even if that's, that's not our primary. I mean, at a certain level, that is our primary objective, but the way we get there is actually through cherishing their whole being.
Beautiful. Thanks, Charles. Couldn't agree more, especially with your point around how leaders do show up, their presence or their energy, if you want to go woo-woo. But even that woo-woo potentially statement is backed up by neuroscience, as you know better than me,
Yeah.
right? With mirror neurons. So it's no
Yeah.
surprise that when we are close to someone who feels restless and fidgety, we feel restless and fidgety. When we are next to someone who is calm and relaxed, we feel calm and relaxed. That actually is now being explained by neuroscience. Yeah, so thank you.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm conscious of time, but I do have two questions that I'm attached and I don't want to let go. So
Yes.
the first one, if you could give us a bit of insight on what depth psychology you're doing, you're earning your PhD in depth psychology, and how is that relevant to the mindful CIO community or mindful leadership community?
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing that up. I know it's not a very common term. It is a field of psychology that is quite large. Actually, it has counts among its founders some of the greats in the field like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. But in particular, it views a human being as being made up of more than just what meets the eye, more than our conscious personality. It sees us as soulful people, if I can use that word. And one way we know that is that we have feelings, things happen. You mentioned having a midlife crisis earlier. This is one of the universal human experiences actually where we think we know ourselves from a conscious perspective, and yet something comes along from inside of us and says, oh no, you need, something's wrong. We need to course correct it. We need life to go in this other direction. And as I'm sure, we talked about this actually when we talked the other day, even though it's hard, these things that come up from inside of us are often very challenging and not comfortable. They're not like, oh yeah, no problem. It's like, change everything. Yes, awesome, Michael. I love that comment. And I think what's embedded in this idea that it's actually fantastic. The idea, the label crisis is actually incorrect. We need more of that attitude. I can say it better myself, is to go along with it, find the courage to listen to what's really being asked of us. And the degree to which we can do that, actually, we find that deeper purpose. And so my work in depth psychology is really leveraging a lot of the work done in that field to help us figure out what is deeper within us, what is hidden. Carl Jung's term of the shadow is getting to be more well known here. And as we do that work, we start to reduce our blind spots. We start to reduce our surprises that, midlife is like a big correction. But once we get into this habit, we can start to actually listen more. Like I said, feel what we're feeling, start to see the patterns in our history and start to react to them so they don't have to surprise us. And the beauty about all of this work is that actually it's really all about awareness, which, as you know, is like the number one thing that mindfulness is all about, is getting to quiet down the busy thoughts and start to listen more deeply. What is really going on? And so kind of similarly as between mindfulness and growth mindset, I'm seeing this really deep kind of partnership between these very, it's a very east-west kind of exercise, which I'm very excited about. And so this is something I do plan to expand on and publish some courses on Insight Timer in the next year or two. And so, yeah, as you said earlier, if anyone's interested, please find me on there and follow me, and hopefully
I am already.
You'll see some interesting content coming up.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Charles, for sharing. That's yeah, very interesting. Final words, lessons, or mantra, whatever you like to leave the group with. We are way over time, but I couldn't,
yes,
hold back.
I apologize.
So, no, it's me not wanting to let go. So, final words or closing words you like to share with the group.
Yeah, I think just continuing on that thread of depth psychology, I'll just end with a quote. It's from Carl Jung, and it has to do with meaning. So I talked a little bit about seeing people in our organization, seeing ourselves as whole beings, searching for meaning. And so he had this beautiful quote where he said, "Meaninglessness inhibits the fullness of life and is therefore equivalent to illness. Meaning makes a great many things endurable, perhaps everything." So I love that quote because I think we like to think of stress as kind of this fixed thing, like, this job is X amount stressful and I need to, just either make that number go down or get better at being able to handle more stress. But he kind of changes that whole equation by saying, wow, if someone sees meaning, if they get the deeper purpose behind, both personally and maybe broader in the organization as to why this thing is important, people, you yourself and others will do amazing things. And stress, what's the difference between stress and a challenge, right? It's at a certain level, it's mindset, and meaning is a big part of that. So I really love that quote, and hope all of you got something out of that.
I certainly did. Thanks again, Charles. Can't wait to have our podcast so I can spend 2 hours with you digging deeper. Thanks so much again for your time, for being here, midnight so late. Yeah, I don't know how much energy you have left in your tank, but if you feel that you could still hang out, please do so before we move to the breakout room discussions. So yeah, it's been a pleasure, and we will talk soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.